Hello, welcome back to Digital Garden 2025. We've just wrapped up day one. We're about to head in for drinks. But before that, I'm here with Mark Smith, who's the founder of Asia Digital Exchange. Mark, thanks for chatting with Tech Capital. How have you found day one so far?
Well, it's super interesting. I mean, first of all, it's always great to get key industry participants all in one room, all talking about the opportunities and challenges that this very exciting industry has to offer. So it's been a lot of fun so far.
Great. Well, Asia Digital Exchange is kind of like a new venture for you, yes. Having formerly kind of led Digital Realty within Asia Pacific. Why don't you just give us like a little bit of an intro into what you've been working on since you left a few years ago?
Sure. So Asia Digital Exchange, basically we see ourselves as bringing capital, in introducing capital to new and unique market opportunities that are present in really North Asia, Japan, Korea, and a few markets in Southeast Asia that we're looking at. And so basically digital ready real estate, as well as core and shell, all the way through to building and operating complete data center. So really the full gamut is what we're looking at.
Got it. Cool.
So we're particularly excited about the Japan market.
Yeah, well, I think there seems to be a lot of that in this room, unsurprisingly.
Yeah.
I guess like as we're now like kind of wrapping up the first half day of content, what's been like kind of your biggest takeaway in terms of what's on the cards for Japan moving forward?
Yeah, so I've lived in Japan off and on for almost 24 years now, and so I know well the opportunity that Japan has to offer. But I think one of my takeaways is just how clear the whole market is seeing Japan as a very real opportunity in the data center space. If you think about it, if you don't mind, just run through a few of the reasons I think that Japan is such an important and very interesting market in the digital real estate space. One, it's a big market. It's a mature market. It's a mature democracy. Rule of law, it's very stable. Rule of law is very strong and something that they've had for a long time. So there's very high levels of trust, and it's a growing market. I spoke last year to the leader of one of the hyperscale cloud providers, and he was saying that Japan is not only their largest market, but it's also their fastest growing market. And it's rare that you get both, the largest market and the fastest growing market. So that makes it really an exciting and interesting market for us in this space. That said, there are real challenges with Japan, and it starts with access to power. There's real power constraints in this market, so that's something that people are looking for, and nothing more valuable at the moment than powered land in Tokyo and Osaka, for that matter. But and so what's interesting is as these constraints, given the amount of demand and yet supply is really constrained, what does that mean in terms of the market dynamics? And I think it's really interesting to think about how the market in Japan and the data center topography, if you will, may change over time. In other words, it may not just be in Tokyo and Osaka. It may move to other parts of Japan. As far away as Hokkaido, SoftBank was talking about their 300 megawatt data center in Hokkaido, down to Kyushu and other places in between. And so I think that's very interesting as you think the next 3 to 5 years, how the topography of kind of the data center industry may change in Japan.
We were just speaking with Podre from Colt about this, and he was saying even though there is this kind of like inevitable disbursement of data centers around Japan, he said he thinks Tokyo and Osaka are going to stay very much as like hubs, and the vast majority of new like kind of projects will be focused on there for the next like 5 years. Is that something that you foresee as well, or do you think there's going to be more of like a spread out?
I think he's right if you can get power. But as I mentioned, power is a very real constraint in these markets. And so I think by necessity, the industry is going to need to look outside of these two markets. I always look at the US and what's happening in the US as a bit of a proxy as to what may come to Asia. And what you see in the US, especially now with AI coming, it hasn't even hardly hit. We haven't even begun to see it in Asia. And as it comes, the AI requirements are very different than just standard cloud requirements. And so that difference is going to drive a difference in terms of the build-outs for data centers. So, for example, you get gigawatt plus campuses in the United States in order to train these LLMs. That's something that we haven't seen in Japan. I think the largest data center is maybe 100 megawatts, ballpark. I think the idea that you will see scale, much larger campuses that are closer to or basically reside close to where the power is something that we'll see more of.
We're starting to see those like gigascale, if you want to call it that, campuses pop up, not just in the US, but Brazil now. There's like a couple in France that have been announced.
Portugal.
Massive one in Portugal with Start Campus, right?
That's right.
And then I think maybe we're getting not necessarily a gigawatt, but like 300, 400 megawatts in like Johor in Malaysia.
That's right.
Why not in Japan yet? And what's it going to take to get to that point?
I think to date the industry has been able to source power and sites with power in Tokyo and Osaka, and those were the preferred locations for Japan, without question. But again, as an industry, as we start to hit kind of those major power constraints, the industry will start to look further afield. Yeah. So.
Got it. And I guess like just moving away from power quickly.
Sure.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about is I found it interesting. I think this is not like a unknown statistic that Japan has this kind of like aging population, and the economic impact of that kind of like demographic shift is something that I feel like is being prepared for a while. But it was referenced at the beginning of the session today that being like a big driver for digital infrastructure. Can you just explain like that kind of like relationship and that dynamic? Like how does that work?
Well, so that was Jesper Cole that was talking about kind of the population dynamics in Japan. And he made a few key points that I think were good. One is in terms of our investment horizon, think 10 to 15 years. And so in terms of the real impact, in terms of population decline, Japanese, it's not really going to hit for 10 to 15 years. It's more 50 years out when that really starts to hit. I'll get to your question in a second. Okay. The other thing is immigration is really starting to grow in Japan, where Japan is a lot of foreigners are immigrating to Japan. And so that's starting to make up the difference in terms of population decline. So that's a little bit of a macro, what Jesper said earlier, which I thought was really interesting. That said, think in terms of digital services and the digital economy and what the critical infrastructure of data centers really are produced to create, which are these digital services and automation, which actually, and you think in terms of AI and the opportunities with AI to significantly increase productivity on a per capita basis. And Japan has a tremendous amount of opportunity to dramatically increase productivity. Historically, it's been a laggard in terms of productivity. And so digital services overlaid with AI has a real opportunity to dramatically improve productivity on a per capita basis in Japan, which would be good for everyone, especially with the population decline. So that really answers your question.
Another one from Jasper's presentation though is that there's like Japan was a leader in a lot of metrics around inequality as well, sort of in the sense that there is a high level of like income equality, access to services is very like democratized. Do you think that like that there's any like relationship there between that kind of like productivity and like digital transformation? Is it, noticing like kind of the US is like the opposite example? They're on the other side of that inequality gap. Do you think that's like a concern that we need to be paying attention to?
I think it's super positive for Japan. One is you look at kind of the geopolitics. Jesper mentioned this today as well, the geopolitics that are playing out globally. And Japan is being a bit more of a neutral player, if you will, globally, I think plays very well for Japan. If you think about where it's a very high trust society, and so what countries will you trust to put your AI clouds? Japan certainly would be one of them in Asia Pacific. The inequality piece, the amount of, I think the Optage fellow, can't remember his name now, but talked about optic fiber being throughout Japan, like 99% of the population can access optical fiber. Right. So basically high-speed internet is throughout the entire country, so that makes it a very level playing field for everyone. And so I think that bodes very well in terms of the rollout of AI in Japan as well.
Yeah, makes sense. One last thing, I guess, from like a kind of policy regulation side of things, we've seen. Going back to kind of your point around US and China, the US take a very hands-off approach to AI, but a lot of executive orders and plans coming through to support the data center industry. Same in the UK, we've seen the critical national infrastructure designations, lots of European policy around funding and supporting data centers. What view is the Japanese government taking in terms of supporting the sector, and is there anything more that you'd like to see from them?
Yeah, that was discussed today, and I thought quite well by the fellow from Cyrus One, KEPCO, the CEO there, and he was talking about additional tax incentives, which has been used very successfully in other countries, other markets. It has maybe not been used as much in Japan, right, which is something that the Japanese government is looking at, and I think will look at, especially as they try to encourage data center operators and cloud service providers to move into either more rural or more strategic locations in Japan. I think that's super interesting. The other is ensuring greater resiliency in terms of subsea cables. Everything is wet. It all comes in via cable landing stations. And the idea that Japan could use more cable landing stations, especially via the Sea of Japan, the other side of Japan, not coming in via the Pacific, but coming in on the other side, such that it will create a much more resilient overall kind of network infrastructure for the whole country.
How much do you think that would impact demand for data centers, though, if there was a lot more subsea cables? Do you think most of the demand is to is the Japanese market, or do you think if there was more connectivity, then Japan could better serve the rest of Asia?
I think that's a huge part of the opportunity. Is not only to serve Japan, but also act as a critical hub for the rest of Asia, especially for AI. At the moment, there's a tremendous amount of data traffic that comes from the U.S. West Coast to Chiba, to the Japanese East Coast, and about 60% of that data is not consumed in Japan. It bounces to the rest of Asia and is consumed in the rest of Asia. And so already a vast amount of that information that's flowing to Japan already bounces to the rest of Asia. And that in and of itself is a great opportunity for Japan.
Yeah, just to play devil's advocate.
Sure, please.
We've heard again in the sessions today that we've got, we heard earlier that it's very expensive construction costs in Japan. We've already identified it's difficult to get energy. There's a few years waiting time. When you do get that energy, I think it's only 30% of the grid which is carbon free, maybe getting to 40 sometime soon. So with all of that in mind, why would I build my Asia-focused AI campus in Japan rather than a Johor or somewhere in Southeast Asia where I can get it for much cheaper? I'm more likely to get renewable energy.
With the U.S. export constraints around the latest NVIDIA chips, there's only a few countries in Asia that are allowed the top-of-the-line latest NVIDIA chips, and Japan's one of them. Korea, Taiwan, Australia, 4 in total. So that would be one very good reason. The other is, depending on where you are in Japan, you look at different power costs, and so you can manage your power costs depending on where you are. So if you are a little more flexible in being outside of the main markets of Tokyo, Osaka, you can see a reduced power expense. Now on the construction costs, you do have higher costs partly because of earthquakes and whatnot, so you have to design the infrastructure in such a way that it can manage.
How much roughly per megawatt are we talking when we say high construction costs?
13 to 15 million.
Okay.
Something that ballpark.
Upper bound of what we'd expect to pay in the US.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And significantly higher than many other markets in Asia.
Cool. Brilliant, Mark. Thank you so much for chatting with us.